this feeling of coming out as Jewish just felt the same as the coming out as trans. Like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I couldn't unsee it in myself that this is who I am. Judaism feels like a conversion feels like an excavation of the Jewish soul and a reunion with a clarity of being.
Welcome to this episode of Your People Will Be My People, Conversion in a Post-October 7th World. Our podcast is sponsored by Project Ruth. Founded in 2023, Project Ruth formalizes Orthodox affiliation for Jews of diverse and varied backgrounds and welcomes those seeking Orthodox conversion to find meaningful connection to and understanding of Jewish life and practice. I am Rabbi Adam Mintz, founder and president of Project Ruth. I am here with my co-host Meredith Berkman, community activist and leader within the Jewish community. And we're fortunate to welcome today our guest, Yona Speidel. Welcome, Yona. Welcome, as always, Meredith. It's really a treat to see both of you today. And Yona, as is our tradition, rather than me trying to butcher a biography, why don't you take it away? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and with a focus, of course, on how your decision to become Jewish and that process, how that played in your absolutely remarkable story.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today. I guess, where do I start? I was born in a little village in Pennsylvania where there was a Mennonite school and a Mennonite community, Old Order Mennonite, which are the horse and buggies and the bonnets and everything. But my family was not. They were ex-Mennonite. So religion was just always a part of my life. One of my earliest memories was, just listening to music and being in a moment of praise and glory and all the, beautiful things about music, and not knowing what that feeling was, except knowing that it wasn't really something that was physical that I could name. So my journey as an artist, I think, parallels my spiritual journey as well in my journey to Judaism. I went into music at an early age to kind of escape my farm chores and living that life. I was given the option to shovel cow manure or practice the piano. So I chose the piano and miraculously got a scholarship to a school when I was a teenager. So I left home the summer I turned 16 to go study music. And from there, fast forward a few years, I came to New York City ready to be an artist. So I worked as a classical musician, musician for musical theater. I did a few shows in the early 2000s. And at that point, I had come out as gay. I had not yet understood really where my gender fit into everything. Most people would say that I'm trans, but also I have a new understanding of that myself. I was diagnosed as intersex 3 years ago, which was about 18 years into transitioning. So having been assigned male at birth and then transitioned to female, all these years later, I realized that there was something biologically innate that led me to that wandering. So who am I? Where do I come from? Technically, I'm an intersex trans person from a rural America. But New York City and the Jewish community in New York is where I really find myself at home. I found myself at home there in the early 2000s when I first moved here and didn't really understand anything about Judaism or uh, other than I thought it was a religion, and that's one of the things that I kind of learned. It's older than the kind of the concept of religion, really, in a way that it's a peoplehood. And I know there's a lot of debate about what is Judaism. So how do you convert to Judaism is a whole other story. How I converted to it was I was working on a show called Transparent, which was a show about a Jewish family in Los Angeles. And this was in 2013. I got hired and I started experimenting with the conversion process. I took the Intro to Judaism class and was just feeling really drawn to understand more about what it meant to be Jewish. I knew that Christianity for me didn't really ring the same as Judaism, and it was a matter of questioning something greater than myself, and then having a million answers that I could look at and debate with and wrestle with. And it just seems to there seems to be an endless well of knowledge in Judaism that really attracted me to it. My mother would say I'm argumentative. Um, and
Sounds like a Jewish
But you're
mother.
the perfect Jew.
exactly. That's what I realized that was welcome. And that wasn't always welcome in other religions that I explored. I studied a lot of religion and different ways of expressing myself spiritually.
Can I ask you a question, Yona? So you mentioned something very interesting, which is that you said you grew up in this Mennonite community, but your family was ex-Mennonite. And I don't know much about the Mennonite community. I mean, I remember going, when you said that, I'm thinking about going to like the Amish parts of
Yeah.
Pennsylvania when I was a little girl. We would go to like Host Corral, and there were all of these places, and it was like very exotic to us. But what was it that led your family to become a quote ex-Mennonite family? And did that mean that were you pariahs within the community? Like, how was that accepted before we even get to your becoming who you truly are, which is a Jew? I'd love to hear that and wonder if that had any impact on your searching different religions and finding your home in Judaism.
I think it had an impact in that there was really room for, I guess, self expression in that community. When it comes to religion, I grew up not I grew up thinking it was exotic as well. The Amish were like these other people, the Mennonite were these other people, and it wasn't until I was much older that I realized that's where we came from. And at that point, my ancestors who had, I guess, converted away from being old order Mennonite had already passed on. So I wasn't able to ask them any questions about it. And it's not something really that was talked about much as well. It was just
You didn't know your ancestors who were Amish.
I mean, I knew I had cousins who wore bonnets and just um, the little nets for the hair, that the head coverings. Um, but I didn't.
It was
It was
never
just
your
seemed.
family, never
It
the
was
family
never my
reunion.
immediate family. It was like second cousins, every once in a while at a family reunion. Or
Well,
my
how were
mom
you
would.
raised? With what denomination of Christianity, if any?
I was raised Pentecostal, so it was a whole other. But my that seemed to be like a brief period because my parents are no longer Pentecostal. I think there was like a lot of experimenting in that community that people felt free to do, to go to different churches, and people were always moving around to different churches. And I think the important thing was to believe in something. And I think that's what also allowed me to feel at home with Judaism. Once I found Judaism, my family was very accepting and encouraging of it. They put a menorah on their Christmas tree this year.
Wow.
So they're very, very happy that I found it. And as far as how does the Amish and the Mennonite affect my Judaism, I think looking back, understanding that we come from different ways of believing, and it's up to us to explore those ways. In the Amish tradition, you have this thing called Rumspringa, which is greatly misunderstood. A lot of people think you just go do drugs and go crazy when you're a teenager, but in actuality, It's a matter of exploring who you are before you finally commit to the church. And then once you commit to being baptized and as an adult, then you're locked in. And there is the negative part of it, which is shunning, and where if you break that, you are shunned and no longer spoken to. But I don't know the Amish that well. Our family wasn't Amish. We were ex-Mennonite. I see family photos and I see them all wearing bonnets, and I'm like, oh, that's my great grandmother. I remember her. And I
Wow, that
did
is
not know she
interesting. But let's
was in
go
a
back
bonnet.
to let's go back to Intro to Judaism 2013.
Sure.
First of
Well,
all, where was the class you took?
it was at Wilshire Boulevard in LA.
Oh, okay, good.
And um, at the time, I think how a lot of Intro to Judaism classes were, um, there was a heavy emphasis on gender rituals. There still is, obviously, because that is an important part of where we come from. Um, but also, outside of the classes, I've learned a lot about gender and Judaism when I was writing on Transparent. And I knew that the Talmud talks about 6 different gender variances. Um, and then um,
How did you feel about that as you were beginning to explore Judaism?
I didn't relate to it. I didn't get it. The being assigned male at birth and then having all these rituals according to that birth felt like something I didn't want to bring into my life. And that was one of the reasons that I pumped the brakes on my conversion. Um, I felt that I had already struggled so much to move myself away from rigid gender rules that I didn't want to align with anything that further conformed to that. What I didn't understand at the time was there is innately in Judaism a lot of room for gender expression and um, conversation around like what does it mean to be male or female, and all the way back to Isaiah and the welcoming of the eunuchs into the temple, which is what eventually um, created the conversations in the Talmud about, well, okay, what are eunuchs? If eunuchs are, according to Isaiah, given a monument and a name that is better than sons and daughters, then what does that mean? And so there has been a discussion about gender variance and gender diversity in Judaism for as long as Judaism has been around. I think a lot of that has been lost and not really understood. Like, what did it mean to have all these eunuchs? There's over 100 mentions of the eunuchs in the Hebrew Bible, but it's not something that we talk about in our life. Like, who were these people?
No, I'm embarrassed to say I am not. That's not something that I'm familiar with, and you've given me some good Shabbat
It's
reading.
interesting, the translation. I don't even think the classical translations translate the word saris as eunuch. So it's really something
Yeah,
that you have to know that
exactly.
that's what it's talking about.
Yeah.
So you said you put the brakes on your conversion at one point. Maybe you could just take us through. I mean, so 2013, you're working on transparency. So interesting. And you're drawn to Judaism. I mean, it sounds like, you're a searcher, right? You're a very spiritual person, and you're as we all are, finding your way in the world. But you're very committed to finding your way and yourself in the world on multiple levels. So what was the moment that made you want to start the process of conversion, like specifically, if there was, and maybe there wasn't, then what was the moment that made you want to stop? And then what made you want to start up again, just so we can get the timeline straight, if you don't mind?
Well, first of all, Transparent demystified Judaism for me in many ways. I had had Jewish friends my whole adult life. You know, I dated a guy who was in rabbinical school when I was in my 20s and met his family out on Long Island. And, I always had a positive experience with the Jews in my life. And there was always a closeness and a familiarity in the way that we laugh, in the way that we tell stories, in culturally speaking. Um, and so Transparent demystified the other areas of Judaism as far as the spiritual practices, the traditions, the rituals, we had a different holiday every year that we would focus on. So I got to learn more about the religious aspects of Judaism. And then I guess it was the talk of gender in the class, in the Intro to Judaism class. I also felt there were so many people who were converting to get married, and I was single and uh, didn't see my experience in the people around me. But also, that was on me. I was in a different place. I wasn't open yet. I wasn't ready, uh, and I think ultimately it just wasn't my time.
It's interesting. 2013 was before the so to speak explosion of conversions. There weren't so many conversions back then, but I guess that in Wilshire Boulevard, I guess that you had a class and you came in contact with all these people who were going to convert. So what happened there? So you put it on pause, and then your career blossomed.
Well, I I stuck with my studies, just not formally. On Transparent, I wrote on 4 seasons of that, and for all those conversations, each season was 6 months in writer's room. So really, like 6 months out of the year, talking about Judaism. It's a lot of time dedicated to discussing, debating, understanding. Um, and then there was the issue of Israel and what was going on politically with the BDS movement. I talked about this on Jonah Platt's podcast a bit. I don't want to get too political with this because I find talking about Judaism itself to be much more satisfying and less
We think
welcoming
so too. You don't have to apologize.
debate. But basically, there was a lot of misinformation out there around what it means to have a Jewish state. And I didn't know what to believe. And it took me a long time to understand and see it for myself, what to believe. So it took a lot of scrubbing away of negative perceptions of Judaism that I had to do on my own. That was part of my search and understanding. And then once I got past all of that and realized that that was just a bunch of nonsense from people who don't understand what it means to be Jewish, then it was an immediate magnetism right back into Judaism. And so that happened about 3 years ago, where I just got really serious about my
Were
studies
you
again.
connected to a rabbi or a synagogue at that point?
Yeah. Rabbi Iggy at Beit Teshuva out in LA was a friend of mine in New York. And when I decided that I wanted to go further into my studies, I was looking at an intro class starting from scratch again. And so I found American Jewish University, AJU. They have Zoom meetings. I live in New York part time and LA part time. So I was able to do the Zooms while going back and forth. I would love to do classes in person, but it's hard.
It was October 7th. So you mentioned 3 years ago. So was there some, I'm just curious because we talk a lot. There are, and Adam referenced this a little bit earlier. There's been a huge uptick for him in the conversions that he does. I'm just a Yenta, but I mean, he's doing these conversions. And there has been an enormous uptick, everyone will say, since October 7th, whether that's people who were thinking about it or people who were married to Jews and whatever. It did that have something to do with it for you?
For sure.
Seven?
That absolutely had everything to do with it. I I had invested a lot of time in the LGBT community, a lot of time and energy in advancing our rights and expanding our voices on a global stage. I won't list all of my accolades, but you can look on Wikipedia. I have made a lot of change in that community. And when October 7th happened, the explosion of anti-Semitism within the LGBT community that I witnessed firsthand, that had nothing to do with Israel. Even it felt like it was just free range for people to air their grievances, um, resentments that had been there and unspoken were being spoken, and it really broke my heart. I felt like I had to move away from LGBT spaces. I tried having conversations with a lot of people privately, and there was so much resistance and gaslighting and denial. And so I just moved away and I felt like I lost my community. And through that, the only people who I felt like understood what I was going through were other LGBT Jews and Jews who were witnessing what was happening and who were awake to what was happening in the world. So that became, I needed, uh, I needed to grieve really. I wasn't allowed to grieve the loss of Jewish life in LGBT spaces. There was an absolute denial of uh, the catastrophic level of events of October 7th, where if you even posted something at all online in sympathy with the hostages or people who were killed, you were accused of being part of Israeli propaganda. And there was just this blunt coldness and lack of empathy um, that really shocked me and terrified me.
So, I mean, this is something that, has been talked about and written about, and I know I'm sure Adam has too. I've had lots of personal conversations with people who said, I'm thinking of one friend in particular. He and his husband, have sent their daughters to a Jewish day school and were very involved here in New York in LGBTQ, groups and communities. And because they are so Jewishly identified and because they self identify as strong Zionists, they felt they lost. They couldn't believe the only community where they felt at home after October 7th was within only in the Jewish community. And we, I've also heard people say who've, been progressive their whole lives, they no longer felt welcome because they were identifying as Jews or as Jews concerned for Israel or as Zionists, et cetera. So I guess when that happened, I mean, you mentioned earlier, I put a note to myself. You said you always felt a familiarity with Judaism. But what you just described at this point, when this happened 3 years ago, and everything exploded, and as you said, free range hate and resentment that comes to the surface, you were not yet a Jew. So one another person might have said, "Well, my God, I thought I was drawn to Judaism. This is so toxic." But it moved you closer. So is that related at all to what you described as like a familiarity earlier in your life at being Jewish? Because I always wonder, like, is it always something that is in there and you have to find it? Or is it,
Absolutely.
right. So maybe you could just speak a little bit about that because somebody else might have in your position said, I don't want any part of this, but it drew you towards what people around you were perceiving as toxic. It's really, I won't say impressive isn't the right word. It's very profound.
It felt profound. Personally, it felt like this. I just felt wide awake all of a sudden. It was like I knew this was a part of me subconsciously, sometimes consciously, but most often, in when I would turn off my studies or move away, that draw was always there. And it feels the same as coming out as trans. It was once I understood that that's who I was, there was no question of like being locked into that path. And
Did you
this felt the
become
same.
a pro-Israel activist at this point?
No. And I still don't consider myself to be any sort of activist. I just don't, I don't think I would come out as trans and then advocate for the destruction of all LGBT centers around the world, um, any more than I would come out as Jewish and advocate for the destruction of Israel. So this feeling of coming out as Jewish just felt the same as the coming out as trans. Like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I couldn't unsee it in myself that this is who I am. Judaism feels like a conversion feels like an excavation of the Jewish soul and a reunion with a clarity of being.
That's beautifully
Excavation of the
said.
Jewish soul. I'm writing that down. I've never heard someone articulate it that way. So that for you, coming out as trans, is it as much, you said it's like coming out as Jewish, meaning is it as much coming out to yourself as it is to the people around you in the same way?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is coming out to yourself when, you know, when you stop pretending to be someone else. Uh,
You,
your life
Wow.
just, you have so much more freedom of thought and clarity of mind that you end up operating in a way that is quicker, uh, more intelligent, more creative. It's a freedom of being that comes with aligning with who you are.
Now, it took you 2.5 years after October 7th to actually formally become Jewish. Were you in the process? Did you just return in 2026? What was that like for you?
Well, the question of what is Judaism was just so all over global headlines for so long after October 7th. It still is. And so it was as if I couldn't escape it in my social circles, but also in my personal life. Um, Going and hearing these horribly anti-Semitic things coming out of people's mouths, I was constantly researching it and looking back and and I was like, no, that's absolutely not true. Like that's a middle age, not middle age, middle ages um, anti-Semitic libel. Uh, so like going through and really educating myself to defend myself on a day-to-day basis of information that I was receiving kind of locked me into a new way of studying Judaism. And then I just kind of got obsessed and was like, I love Judaism. I just really fell in love with so many of the traditions and the way that the traditions and rituals would regulate my mind and regulate my time, my way of looking at the world. I mean, like Havdalah, for example, is one of my favorite rituals. And it's the marking of the holy and the common, like setting a marker in your life and setting these rituals to rest, to restore. I think a lot of Jews take for granted, like just how much that improves someone's life if you grew up with those rituals. But coming from the outside world and not having access or experience with those rituals, I really felt a marked difference in my life.
And how did the people around you? I just can't stop thinking an excavation of the Jewish soul. I actually, an excavation means you're unearthing something that was always there. So I just want to ask you like a
Yeah,
very specific sort of spiritual question. And I wonder, Adam, maybe you can give the theological answer, although, Yona, I wouldn't be surprised if you had the theological answer, which is
I would love
I
to hear
always,
Adam as well.
I always wonder when they say like a bintel yid, like a bit of a Jewish spark. So the way you, and then I have another question. Well, the way you describe the excavation, do you believe for yourself and maybe even for others that people who convert were Jewish souls put into a non-Jewish body? I know this also gets to the trans issue about the body you're in, and I would only ask you that because you raised it. So if I do not articulate it in a sensitive or appropriate way, I hope you will forgive me because no one has spoken of this excavation to us before. And I don't mean because because of the trans, but I mean just in general. Do you think that's that for you or others that it's you're in the, the soul is there, it's a Jewish soul, or is it just that a soul is ignited rather than excavated? I just wonder your thoughts about that. And maybe Adam, you could also, if is there a theological answer to that question as well?
Let's
But I
listen
want
to
to,
Yona first.
yes,
Well,
please.
I mean, I was at Mount Sinai, obviously. Like
I was going to say the same thing, so we're okay.
that's how I feel.
We're
Once
all
I
at Sinai
understood what that
together.
meant, I was like, oh yeah, I was at Mount Sinai. That makes sense. but what does it mean, like, psychologically? Like, why do I operate as a better human when I am in my Jewish element? I think it's a matter of, yeah, it was predestined. I don't know what that means outside of the idea of Mount Sinai. But if you think of an artist, like moving away from like a trans identity, like an artist is born an artist. Like it's just the creative mind, and whenever that person can um, live their life in a way that stimulates their brain and gives them the best version of themselves, they're going to be happy. They're going to have better relationships. They're going to sleep better at night. Although I haven't always, I mean, I have not slept better at night converting at this time in my life
There's good things to come, we
politically.
promise. So tell
Thank
us
you.
how you finally got into the mikvah.
The mikvah was, I went to the AJU's mikvah. Um, well, I did the classes, and um, I was a little bit embarrassed to just be so eager about wanting to convert, because part of me was like, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to convert? Like, it's it's this weird permission I never gave myself that, yes, you are a Jew. I really had to look at that of like, okay, my soul is Jewish. I am Jewish. I'm allowed to do this. And all I have to do is take the actions to do it. One thing to sign up for classes, and it's another thing to say, I will go before three rabbis in a trial and commit myself to the Jewish people for the rest of my life. And so when I did that, I went to my
Who were the
rabbi.
rabbis?
One was one of my teachers at AJU, Rabbi Janice, and then Rabbi Jade at Rabbi Iggy's Beit Shuvah. Rabbi Jade is one of the associate rabbis there. Um, so I just went and talked to Iggy first and said, I absolutely want to do this. And it was before the classes ended. So I started to talk to him about other things that I needed to do. And, one of the things was to write an essay um, about, he gave me a list of different options, actually. He was like, pick one of these. Which one sounds good? And it was a writing assignment. And as a writer, I just, I put it off for a minute. Like I've got too many deadlines. But I chose to write about what the holy texts mean to me, because that was the entry point for giving myself permission ultimately. When I read that Isaiah welcomed the eunuchs into the temple, I was like, well, that's pretty clear to me that there is a place for me. If there was a place for me in the temple 2,000 years ago, um, there certainly is a place for me.
It's a great image. We love that image, and it's such a personal image for you, which makes it so much more meaningful. My question, and Meredith will make the question better, but my question is, you've been on this journey for at least 13 years, and really for longer. Has anything changed post mikvah? You changed your name. That's interesting, because let's be honest, you're a celebrity. You have name recognition. And you chose to take on your Jewish name, even though that may create, I'm sure people told you that's going to create some confusion about what your name brand is, but you did it. So please talk about your choice of the name Yona. And then, how else has your connection to Judaism changed post mikvah?
Well, the stage name Our Lady J was meant to be a bit sacrilegious. And it was a play on the Lady Chablis, who was a trans performer. Um, she was one of the first trans performers that I had heard of who wrote a book. And it was like a lighthearted way through her transitions. So it was really just meant to be this temporary thing that ended up sticking, because there are so many ladies in uh, as far as trans performance goes, and it's always tongue in cheek. It's never like this self-serious name. Um, so Yona is the Hebrew name for Jonah, and Jonah was my name before I transitioned. Although it wasn't my birth name. My birth name was Justin, and my three brothers all had biblical names, and I struggled so much with understanding the Bible and spirituality and religion that I thought maybe because I had been given a Roman name, I was cursed. Hearing myself say it is ridiculous.
No,
But
it's actually it's not ridiculous.
Absolutely not. We
No,
think that makes total sense to us.
yeah.
So you're and ironically, the name Yona in Hebrew is both a man's name and a
yeah.
woman's
It
name.
means
Well,
dove.
That
so
Yona means
that
dove.
that kind of that worked out for you, as if God is smiling. That worked out for you, so you're
I
able to
agree.
take the name Jonah, which is a boy's name, and you
Yeah,
Hebraicized it, and all of a sudden it became a name that was right for you now.
Why did you change your
exactly.
name from Justin to Jonah? That was along the Jewish journey?
No, that was me thinking that because I didn't have a religious name, I couldn't understand. This was in my early 20s I did this. So it was part of my wrestling at the time, but way before I transitioned. So I just started going by Jonah. And because I liked the story of Jonah and the whale, I liked the story of a reluctant prophet, someone who was defiant and stubborn and didn't always do the right thing, but ended up getting sent where he needed to be anyway.
Adam, you said something. You said if when you become a different person, but I think what I find so in all of these stories, and as I think we said to you before, every story is so unique to that person and their journey. But then there's also something universal because based on everything that you've said, and we've heard this in different stories, it's not that you become a different person, you become your true self.
Right.
And so that on so many levels, your story is all about it, becoming and acknowledging and accepting your true self. So I just want to go back for a moment. You said that your family has been very accepting, that your parents had put a menorah on their Christmas tree. Um, but we also were speaking earlier about a lot of the toxic rhetoric after October 7th around Jews and Israel. So what what are the range of responses that you received after becoming the Jew that you are and always were in your soul?
Um, the range of responses to my conversion, I think, I don't know, it's a complicated question because my conversion took such a long time. And my conversion changed me. Like it did. Life after the mikvah feels different. It
It
um
does feel different. You really feel that you've come into yourself post mikvah.
yeah, there's a confidence that I have that is also a feeling of I'm home now. And what is next on the agenda? What does home look like for me? How do I create a Jewish home? And how do I bring these elements into my life uh, and deepen the practices? So I I can't say that the responses around me are that it was a one-sided thing. Uh, there was a conversation happening around me. So some old friends who I'd become distance with became closer, and then a lot of friends who I had been close with fell away. Um, a lot of that was political. I think people were confused at what I was doing. There's so much bad information out there about what does it mean to be Jewish. There's like, for some people, it's just this mystifying thing that is has negative qualities to it. And so they began to put that on me, I suppose. I don't know. A lot of it was just unanswered questions. Um, there's a lot of ghosting that happened where I just stopped hearing back from people. A lot of unanswered phone calls and texts that just became, a couple weeks would go by and then a couple months and then oh, I guess that person's no longer in my life. But then I filled those empty spaces with other relationships. So it things have been a bit topsy-turvy. But now that I'm coming into like 6 months from my mikvah, it's feeling a lot more steady.
Your story is remarkable, and we give you all the credit. And we give you the credit because of the complexity of your life. But we give you the credit also because what we find in these podcasts and these interviews is that conversions that take a long time are especially challenging. I do conversions. I facilitate conversions for people. But you decide you're going to convert, you study, and you go to the mikvah. And it lasts a year, it lasts a year and a half, and then you go to the mikvah. But people who fall away, it's rare that 5 years later I hear from them. If they fall away, either they didn't convert or they went somewhere else, but you kind of kept going and you came back, which I want to say is remarkable. But just as we finish up, your book is a fascinating book. It's a bestseller right here. I want to know what the next chapter in that book is.
I mean, honestly, I've talked to my rabbi about what would it be like to convert conservative. I've converted reform. I know from what I understand, Orthodox doesn't allow trans conversions. So I'm
Is that
interested.
still true?
We'll talk about that, Yoda, after the podcast is over.
I want to learn about all the different types of Judaism there are. And so, I'm a member at Beit in LA, but I'm currently, shul shopping in New York. I'm dating around and getting to know the different types of services that are out there. And I find myself a little bit more attracted to conservative Judaism and modern Orthodox. I love Reform. Obviously, there's such a place for everyone in Reform, but I am a little bit more adherent and observant. So I want to see where that takes me, and if that takes me to another conversion, then that might be fun.
Amazing. So first of all, Yona, Meredith and I will both speak to you offline about
Thank you.
what the opportunities are out there so that maybe we can help you write that next chapter. And
Thank you
we
so
want to
much.
thank you for joining us.
Thank
And
you
we
so
want to say
Thank you for
that,
having me.
your story is so meaningful and powerful, but what's most exciting about your story is what's yet to come. So we look
For all
forward
of
to
our
the next
stories.
podcast and the next part of the story.
Yeah, and
Thank
I
Thank
have to
you.
say, I'm thinking so much about the excavation of a Jewish soul. I think that is, I mean, you're a writer, obviously, you're a wordsmith, but it is so profound. I'm never going to forget that. Really want to think about that. It's a
Thank
beautiful
you.
image. So God
Thank
bless you
you.
and welcome home.
God
Really.
bless you too. Thank you very much.